Hello everyone, this is Eva Nolik-Smith with Yoga U Online, and I am very pleased to be here today with Philip Shepard, author of the book New Self, New World, Recovering Our Senses in the 21st Century. Phil left a career as an actor, playing lead roles on stages in London, New York, Chicago, and Toronto, to dedicate his life to offering workshops internationally on the art of embodiment. Philip's main tenet is that we have been trained to live in our head, and as such, we're missing out on some of the most important aspects of our being. The aim of his work is to help us reconnect and relearn to listen to the world, not so much with our mind and senses, but through our body. Welcome, Philip. That sounds like quite an order.
Well, I mean, it is. I talk about my work and people, are curious and they ask, "What's it like?" And you know, it's not it's not a technique. It's not an add-on. It really is a different way of being.
Yeah, and tell us what you mean by embodiment, because it has become a little bit of a buzzword these days. So what does the term mean to you, and what led you to dedicate your life to teaching people about the importance of embodiment, living in our bodies?
To me, embodiment is really about an experience of the whole of your intelligence. So we've been systematically trained to compartmentalize our intelligence. So, in school, in the public school system, sit still and get this into your head. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Whatever it may be. And when you think about it, the system gets us when we're 5 years old and has us for 12 years, and day after day the whole system is dedicated to that message
Mhm.
that what happens from the neck down is considered inconvenience or interference, and thinking happens in the head. So the schism, the primary wound we experience in our culture, is a separation between our thinking and our being. And that also separates us from the world, because to think of, if I think of my being as my body, um, I'm entering a fantasy, because anything exists only in relationship. I experience my being as I experience this room and the bird song out the window and you on my screen, and all of that at the moment is part of my being.
Mhm.
So we've isolated our thinking not just from the body, but from the world. And then we look at the world as though peering at it through a window, or,
Mhm.
or the windscreen of a car, which makes us feel so familiar because it's the way we sit in our heads.
Right.
So embodiment takes those compartmentalized aspects of our intelligence. The heart, is compartmentalized from the head. The genitals compartmentalized from the heart. So that, it used to be that when I was a kid, movies, there'd be romance in movies, but like no sex. And now there's like sex, but
No
very,
romance.
right. So it's just symptomatic of the way. And then there's this profound intelligence in the pelvic bowl that attunes to wholeness. That it's an intelligence that feels wholeness and is informed by it. And of course, that's compartmentalized. So to me, embodiment is simply about an experience of the whole of your intelligence.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I think since my background is a yoga teacher and most people in our community are yoga teachers, I think as a yoga teacher you experience a lot when you teach different age groups, the continuous separation from the body that occurs through the ages. So when you get someone in their teenage year or 20s, they still are fairly well connected and they pick up on things very quickly. But once you get above 50 or 60, the separation from the body is striking to the extent that when you introduce a new movement that hasn't been part of their repertoire, they just do not know how to connect with their body to do very simple movements. And it's really interesting. But of course, what you're talking about is a separation that goes even beyond that, that relates not just how we relate to our bodies, but how we relate to life.
Yeah, and once you realize how stuck we are in the head, you begin to appreciate how everything we do tends to be in a top-down modality. Mm-hmm. So our breath, we sit up in the head and push the breath into the body because we know a deep breath is important, but it becomes a top-down experience rather than a release of the body's tissues and cells to the breath as a whole. You know, the tacit risk in yoga, in any modality of body work, is that you've got a picture in your head of what the body should do, and you make it do it. And as you're saying, you miss the feeling, you miss the attunement and intelligence that a sensitized body just courses with.
Right. Yeah. Now, fill in some of the blanks for us. How did you come to this work? What inspired you to write a book, teach workshops internationally, and what were some of the personal experiences that developed your teaching?
It goes back to childhood. I mean, it really does. When I was a kid, I felt my being was under assault by the world around me. It felt like the adults were living out a fantasy and sort of inviting me to come and join them in it. And I'm thinking, like, no, why would I? I mean, the adults in my world were insane. You know, as a kid, I spent my days. There was this little ravine with a spring-fed creek running through it, and it teemed with life, with, you know, frogs and snakes and pheasants and foxes and rabbits, and the adults buried that creek in a sewer and put suburban lawn over top of it. I mean, so I, as an early teenager, I lived with a rage that was bucking against the sense that my thinking was being funneled down these well-worn grooves. And I fought it and I fought it. I mean, I eventually knew that I would succumb if I didn't leave my culture. I knew that it was the patterning and hierarchies and thought forms and language of my culture that all conspired to tell me a story about what it means to be human. And that story says that to be human is to live in your head. It's to be divided from the world, divided from yourself. Idea trumps experience, you know, the whole thing. And so at 18, I went to England and bought a bicycle and headed off for Japan. Reasoning, you know, as an 18-year-old Mike, that if the bike is headed in the right direction and I don't stop pedaling, I'll get there. And, you know,
a few oceans notwithstanding.
Yeah. But that bike trip took me through so many ways of understanding what it means to be human. And I found every one of them illuminating and liberating. At the same time, I recognized that each of them is limited. Every story about what it means to be human is a limitation. And I think that's why, you know, on a little tangent, I think that's why initiation rites were so important. because you go on a walkabout, you go on a vision quest, and you encounter reality directly. There is no mediation. You are alone in this experience, and you realize in the course of that no story can contain reality. It's just not possible. So then you come back from the initiation rite with a recognition of the value of the story, and at the same time of its limitations, and you will never again see the world in the same way.
That's beautiful. And you also, one element of your background is your acting career. Did that impact your work as well?
I mean, it was huge. It was central to it. The reason I went to Japan from England is because I'd seen a form of classical Japanese no theater. It's a form of theater developed in the time of Chaucer, and it hasn't changed. And it is so formalized and restrained that it could contain loss and grief and terror within this formalized structure. And I saw a no theater play in Montreal and was emotionally just shaken to my core by it. And I didn't know how it had had that effect on me. And I was pretty good at parsing theater even at that age. And this was a mystery. And so I had to solve the mystery. So I took off for Japan and studied it. And that's where I encountered the Japanese concept of hara. And hara is, translates into English as belly, but that's where the similarity ends, because, in our culture, the belly, it tends to be a source of embarrassment. It has indigestion. It is all too prone to weight gain, whatever it might be. We have this very judgmental, externalized relationship with the belly. And in the Japanese culture, hara is understood as the profoundest seat of your understanding and truth. So in the no play I saw, every gesture arose from that deeper harmony. Every word that was spoken came from that place. I'd never seen that in my life. And so, that at the age of, by the time I got to Japan, I was 19. So at the age of 19, the door opened to that deeper realm in the body. And it took me years to find my own clarity around that. But yes, to answer your question more concisely, theater has had just a huge effect, because as an actor, if you're on stage and you're self-conscious, you're dead. So self-consciousness is what is drummed into us. We sit in the heads and supervise ourselves. We watch ourselves. That supervision is the very essence of self-consciousness. As an actor, you have to be world conscious. You have to be open to what is happening and swimming on its currents, or your performance will be wooden. There's no way of puppeteering the self into grace.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. The concept of hara is also like in the Qigong tradition. It's the movement center or the energetic center, again, that you act from. And I believe also in martial arts.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in the Chinese culture, the lower dantian is
the lower dantian, yes,
understood as the foundation.
Right. So what was the training you underwent when you did the no acting training that helped you get in touch with that energetic center?
I didn't do much training. I did a little bit, but my interest was never to become a no actor. Mm-hmm. My interest was to understand the principles that were animating this theater form, that I might come back home and sort of introduce those principles into the Western tradition and see where that would take. But I studied a little bit, but my mirror neurons were just firing. I was feeling in my body everything that was happening on that stage, and it profoundly affected me. And since then, I've trained in Buto, which is a more modern form of Japanese performance, which deals with image and body and what is felt through the body without any sort of externalized concern with what is expressed. And as soon as you have the desire to express something, you're in a divided state, because there's one part of you that knows what you want to express, and the rest of you sort of gathers to implement that. There's a great Polish director, Jerzy Grotowski, who said, true expression is that of a tree. And you look at any tree, and each tree expresses something unique and luminous. And the tree is not trying to express. The tree is just being. And in a similar way, as a no actor, as a Western actor, to allow yourself to just be within the currents flowing through the stage is really the seed of any true expression that happens.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Mm.
So these ancient cultures, the Japanese with the higher tradition, the Chinese with the lower Tanjian, they all had this concept of an energetic center that was the center of our being in essentially located in the lower part of our body. And modern neurologists now are talking also about that area, the belly, the pelvic bowl, as a second brain. So how those two parallel streams of thinking, how do they relate to each other?
Science sort of recognizes three brains in the body. The cranial brain, which we know of, the brain in the pelvic bowl, which is also called the enteric nervous system, and the heart. The heart has such a density of neural tissue that many people recognize it as the brain. And I think there's more than just a coincidence to the fact that cultures speak of thinking with the head, cultures speak of thinking with the heart, cultures speak of thinking with the belly. The enteric nervous system was actually finally embraced by neuroscience in the 1980s, and we resisted it resisted it through neglect, resisted it in so many ways for the better part of the century at that point, because there's no place in our culture story about what it means to be human for a brain in the belly. That brain, which connects through the vagus nerve, affects everything. I mean, it creates 95% of the body's serotonin. And then there's the gut biome and all the interactions that happen there. And the brain in the belly, in evolutionary terms, is our first brain. The cranial brain was a later development. And, somebody can be in a vegetative state where the cranial brain is inactive, and they can still live if that first brain is functioning. If the first brain stops functioning, this won't keep us alive. Mm. And we've put, as a culture, we've put all our faith and all our accolades on the brain and the head. We think reason is supreme, and we try to think our way through problems and stop feeling it. When that schism between our thinking and our being actually heals, you feel every thought. There is no division between thinking and feeling. But we give reason this place of supremacy in our culture, and in the most important things in our life, reason is utterly impotent. You can't reason your way into the present. You can't reason your way into love. You can't reason your way into your soul's purpose. It's useless for any of that, or almost useless. So it's to come back to your soul's calling, to come back to your life in this moment, is to come back to the body, to come back to that deep, deep knowing in the pelvic bowl that comes into felt relationship with the world around you.
Yeah. And just to play devil's advocate and give you a provoking question.
Excellent.
So, why does it really matter? Our current way of thinking has led to important progress and the benefits and joys of the modern civilization.
Well, let's look at one of the
the benefits and joys.
There's this undercurrent in our culture, this belief that knowledge will save us, and it informs our learning institutions, our businesses, our daily lives. Knowledge will save us. Better check email because knowledge. I need more information. So when you prick the bubble of that assumption, you realize, well, let's see, if knowledge could save us, we'd be in much, much better shape now than we were 2,000 years ago. And the reality is we've pushed the delicate ecosystems on which we depend to the point where they're unraveling. And you begin to realize, far from being able to save us, knowledge is lethal. Every one of the major problems we face was created by knowledge. Weapons of mass destruction, burning of fossil fuels, the manufacturing of plastic, which is filling our oceans, any problem you look at, overpopulation, it's been made possible by knowledge. So knowledge is lethal unless it's counterbalanced by self-knowledge. Now, self-knowledge, we have degraded our idea of what self-knowledge is into a sort of grocery list that, well, this is my Facebook profile, and these are my friends and my favorite TV shows, and that's who I am. This is my favorite color. Who are you? Knowledge and self-knowledge, in my mind, are opposites. We imagine that you gain self-knowledge by going deep inside the body, and there it is. And I think that's part of our culture's fantasy. Inner work is important, but inner work is about finding the obstructions in the body that blind you and numb you to the world around. Once you've found those, once you've released those, then that spaciousness of the body can just resonate to the world. And as you come into felt relationship with the world around you, it will illuminate you. You come into relationship with a child playing on the sidewalk, and it illuminates you in a particular way. You come into relationship with a flower budding into bloom, and it illuminates you in a certain way. With a neighbor, with whatever, felt relationship is what illuminates us. Opening to the world in that way is what illuminates us, and we discover who we are truly. So then, yes, living in the head has brought us, well, the way I would say it, living in the head has enabled us to create a fantasy world that is cracking at the seams at the moment. And the essence of that fantasy world is the idea that we are independent. and you live in your head, you feel independent, and it becomes sort of an axiomatic understanding of the world. Mm-hmm. But if you drop out of the head into the body, then suddenly you belong, and it's a whole different relationship. Mm-hmm. So the fantasy world we've created is one that upholds the idea that we're independent. You see that in our economic systems, which depend on limitless growth. If an economy slows down, it's a disaster. Well, we're on a finite planet. Limitless growth is a fantasy, but it's the one we've pinned our hopes to. If the population starts aging or diminishing, it's a disaster. Every time the population grows, the planet groans. We're taxing the resources of the planet to the breaking point, and we're doing it from a place of control rather than a place of harmony. We get into our car, and a car is a head on wheels, and we feel independent from the world around us, and we listen to our music and the way we listen to our thoughts walking down the world. And a car, 3 headlights would illuminate the road better than 2, but then a car wouldn't look like a head. So we need the 2 headlights to feel that familiarity of the way we live in the body. It's that our sense that we're independent from the world leaves us feeling separate from each other, separate from our own bodies, separate from our lives, and it's a disaster. So living in the head, the primary characteristic that results from living in the head is the sense of being alone. Being alone is a fantasy. There is no aloneness. You immutably belong to everything that is happening at this moment, everywhere.
That's beautiful. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Thomas Myers, but he's a body worker as well, who has mainly charted some of the interconnected relationships in the body. But one of his things that he points out also is that we tend to favor our visual and auditory connections with the world and have cut ourselves off from the kinesthetic information, the kinesthetic learning, which is another word for saying the body and our sensory system is connecting us with the world in ways that we can't even imagine because we're so unhabituated to using that part of our body. So in your work, you're up against decades and decades and decades of conditioning. How do you help people to reconnect with this dimension of our being?
In the workshops I teach, I move through 4 themes in the course of the weekend. And the first is breath. So we spend a morning on breath, and it's unlike any breath work I've encountered. We're patterned to muscling the breath. We don't know what it is to release the body to the breath. A baby knows. I mean, you look at a baby in its cradle, and it's just the body's releasing to the in-breath, and the body's releasing to the out-breath, and there's no muscling. When you try to initiate the breath through muscling, you're working against the body's intelligence. And I don't propose any right way of breathing, but the principle that informs my breathing is that every part of the body should be available to the breath. Is the sacrum available to the breath? Are the legs available to the breath? So we work through, maybe 8 different practices that soften the body into the breath, and especially the pelvic bowl. But there are also practices that look at how we interfere with the breath. So when we speak, we tend, speaking is such a funny thing because what is inside you suddenly shows in the room. And so we inhibit our speaking and inhibit our breath. And It's only when you're speaking with the quality of a sigh that the whole of the body can be available to the voice. And so rather than speaking on a sigh, we tend to hold the breath like this and place our words and get them right. And it just throws the body into a shadow of neglect. So the first theme is breath. The second theme is rest. So the work on breath sort of awakens the sensitivity of the pelvic bowl, and then you can come to rest in the body. Because in our culture, we're trying to get back into the body, but we don't know where to land. That's not available to us. So to learn that there is no firm distinction that can be made between the body's energy and the mind. If my mind is unsettled, my body's energy is unsettled. If my body's energy is calm, my mind is calm. They're manifestations of the same thing. So then you can learn to actually notice the energy of your body, allow it to come to rest. And then you can bring your center of awareness deep down into the pelvic bowl so that it comes to rest on the perineum. And when that happens, when the center of your awareness is at rest on the perineum, you enter a completely different realm of your consciousness. And then the third theme the workshop moves through is receptivity. Once you're there at rest on the pelvic bowl, on the pelvic floor, on the perineum, you can move into a place of receptivity. And again, receptivity in one sense is the same as presence. If I can't receive your presence, I'm not present to you. If I don't receive the sensations of my breath, I'm not present to you. So then to receive the world into that place, to actually feel the world living within you, then enables you to integrate, which is the fourth theme. So what we've lost in our culture by living in the head is the ability to integrate. The head is great at analysis, but the word analysis means to break apart. That's what analysis is. And we're trying to create a whole picture of the world through analysis. It's a contradiction in terms, almost. The body knows how to integrate. Once you're deep at rest on the pelvic bowl, on the pelvic floor, you're in a place of repose within the body's genius for integration. And you feel the whole, and your thinking and your being have reunited. And you move into a sense of wholeness that our culture is blind to, because our culture is so intent on independence and that fantasy of independence that it conceives of wholeness as something that happens within a boundary. So I think of my wholeness as something in the boundary of my skin. I speak of being whole in body, mind, and spirit, as though wholeness were just a matter of bringing these three aspects of myself, into balance and allowing each of them to flourish, and then I would be whole. And it's ridiculous. I think I can be whole out of relationship with the world. But it's the very fantasy. You speak of senses. It's the very fantasy that the five senses we acknowledge upholds, because each of those senses implies a boundary. Sight, light crosses the eye and lands on the retina. A stimulus from the outside crosses the boundary of the self. The same with hearing, the same with touch, taste. It's all about external stimuli crossing this boundary of the self and being registered. Well, what about balance? We speak about a sense of balance. There's an organ devoted to balance, but it doesn't qualify in our culture as a sense because there is no boundary. Balance is a felt relationship. The center of the earth is felt in relationship to your center of gravity, and they come into a relationship. There's no stimulus from the outside crossing a boundary of the self. It's a mutual exchange. There's a culture in Africa, the Anglo-Ive, that has a completely different idea or experience of what senses are. Every sense in the Anglo-Ive culture is felt within the body. Hearing, sight, everything is felt within this echo chamber of the body. And their realm, they speak of Sesilalame as the realm of sensation. Sesilalame translates as feel at flesh inside. Here's our culture where all of our senses sort of are exterior receptors, they're called, about the outside world, and this Anglo-Ive culture where balance is actually their foremost sense, and feel the world resonating through the body. It's a kind of long-winded answer to the question.
Yeah. It's fascinating. It's the realm of intuition and the realm also of spiritual knowing.
Yeah, I think of the body as a bell, and the body, it resonates. It's a resonator that rings to the world around it, and the currents of the present are innumerable. The world, is not a world of 4 dimensions. It's a world of 5 dimensions. Everything is in contact with everything at all times, and those currents that run through the wall, if the resonator is clear, will ring you and inform you. But in our culture, it's like we stuff cotton balls into the bell and it loses its resonance. And when the bell loses its resonance, the present no longer exists. You can't feel it. You don't get information from it. And then why would you leave your head? Because this is where you know. And knowing is understood as objective knowledge rather than that deeply informing knowledge of the body that feels wordlessly and knows, as you say, intuitively or preconsciously.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I read over some of the testimonials from your workshops, and it sounds like a very transformative experience. But what are some of the comments you want to share? Some of the comments from your participants?
Yeah, I've got a letter that just arrived in the mail.
Okay.
It came with a little green leaf, which is very nice. When I sat down in that circle of strangers at your workshop, my body knew there was a change in the making. You had the spiritual presence that changed my presence, and it was a profound feeling. Nothing in that moment mattered but life itself, the pure, blissful life of breath, which I had never felt before your workshop. It was almost effortless when I realized that I just have to surrender to it. It's something that had been planted in me, but you made it clear that wholeness doesn't have boundaries. It has no outer limits to face. That's the most beautiful thing about it. I've carried this seed with me during my strenuous last weeks of college. In those moments, I become conflicted with too many emotions to count. But when I dropped my consciousness down to my belly, my reality and relationship with myself shaped the moment. Those conflicting emotions were no longer with me, and I was one with myself, earth, and the present. It was the healing potion I had neglected so many times and never thought to give a try. I will always keep that with me, to notice your breath, not to judge its presence, because when you do, it's no longer your friend, but an anchor weighing you down. And in your workshop, I felt my breath not weigh me down, but help me fly. I flew so high, I never thought I would come down to earth again. It was a magical and new experience I will always hold with me. You've given me so much, and now I have the tools to become a more whole being in this world. Anyway. Yeah,
That's
you know,
amazing.
I read it. You know, it arrived in the mail, and I opened it, and
That's so beautiful.
so deeply touched.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Philip, we could keep you here all day.
It's fun, yeah.
Uh, but everyone, if you want to learn more about Philip and his workshops, you can find him at philipshepherd.com. You have quite a few workshops in the
And
US.
the spelling of there are about 13 ways to spell Philip Shepherd. So
Right.
I should just mention the spelling is Philip with one L and Shepherd, Shepherd, just like the guy who looks after the sheep.
I was thinking that when we started. It's very beautiful.
Yeah.
And the name of your book again is
New Self, New World. And I've got
Recovering.
another book coming out in November called Radical Wholeness. I'm thrilled to bits about it.
Beautiful. Well, thank you again so much for sharing your work. It sounds amazing, and I know we'll find a way to try it ourselves.
I hope so. It's been lovely talking with you. Thanks, Eva.
Thanks. Great talking with you.
Bye bye.
Bye.